this really slide is to talk about first impression failures. So what we must be careful of doing, and it's easy to fall into this trap, but we must be careful of prejudging the seller. So when we're in a buyer-seller meeting, we really ought to be keeping an open mind. A lot of the time, it's a testament to their life's work. They might have had a business for 20 to 30 years, and to them, it's their baby. It can be quite an emotional journey for them, whereas obviously for you as the buyer, it's quite a commercial transaction. So you really just want to get stuck in and get to the main points, which obviously will make the difference to you, whether you will choose to progress further or not with it, as the case may be. So it is important. It is a bit of a dance. It is important to listen to the seller and to build up that rapport, build up that relationship, and not to be too quick to prejudge. Let them speak and understand what their journey's been like and how they've gotten to where they are today and that sort of thing. So don't be too quick to give business advice. Ask the right questions. It is important that you do ask questions to get as much information, get all the facts as possible before you just jump straight in with your initial comments and perhaps criticisms of the business. Also, it's probably a good idea not to be too aggressive on price. Price is important, of course it is. But this initial discussion, buyer-seller discussion, really should be more about building up that rapport, that relationship, understanding about the business. So don't focus the discussion too much on price at the early stage, I would say, because that does put off a seller. I'll have to say. So focus on perhaps the motivation to sell. Why are they looking to sell? What's brought them to the decision? And touch gently on motivation for sale. Don't again be too quick to prejudge the reasons for that. I mean, there may be a number of reasons: ill health, retirement. They may have other things going on that they clearly need to spend more time on to develop, which is more of or becoming more of a priority for them. So get to learn more about that, I would say. And, a big mistake is being unprepared for these meetings. The more research, the more initial desktop due diligence you can do prior to entering these discussions, the better, because it just makes you look right. The seller, it's a great first impression, thinks that you're a serious buyer and you mean business. So, the other thing that I've seen in the past years is buyers making the mistake that they think that they've got to get out, assuming that the seller's desperate. Oh, it's a pandemic, maybe perhaps it's a fire sale. Well, that's not often the case. And remember, again, they brought this business up from, maybe 20 years ago, and humble beginnings. So you really want to make them feel, obviously within limitations, of course, that the business that they brought up is and built up is a good. Now we're going to come on to some negotiation failures here. Going in too low is often a mistake. Obviously, nobody wants to start off with their highest offer. That's totally understandable. But also, conversely, going in too low could be a problem. So you really want to think about making an offer that you would accept if you put yourself in their shoes, and leave about, I'd say, a good 20% margin for discussions, negotiations, so that they don't just walk away or feel insulted by your first offer. So offering low remunerations as well on consultancy is often a problem for sellers. So you want to think about yourself again in their shoes. If you were to work on for 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years, what would you expect from a senior position of a business with their wealth of knowledge and experience? So you want to make sure that it's going to be attractive enough for them to want to be incentivized, to stay on, should we say. Assuming that there's no other interested parties can be a mistake. We don't want to think that we're the only show in time. You might be up against 2 or 3 other potential bidders. So good businesses are often sought after. So don't become too complacent on that point. And then finally, on negotiation failures, taking too long to respond is a real sort of problem in a lot of respects for sellers. I've witnessed it. We've had meetings and discussions, and then waiting weeks sometimes for feedback, and whether or not the buyer is going to put in an offer or not. This turns a seller off quite quickly. They think you're not serious, and I understand a lot of buyers like to play a bit of a game and not go in too quickly after the first meeting, which is totally understandable. That is a good tactic in a lot of respects, but leaving it too long to go back to the seller is also a sort of, shall we say, a risk in that regard. So you want to keep that momentum going, really. Okay, so moving on to due diligence. This is a very important part of the process. I'm sure everyone will agree. So if you did come across a scenario whereby there would be a drop in turnover, the first reaction is usually to go, oh, not sure about this one. Maybe perhaps we'll move on to the next. Well, that's not often perhaps the best first decision to make if it's a really interesting business, because there could be a number of reasons why that's happened. It could just be a blip or a bump in the road due to something or another. So you want to think of different ways perhaps to overcome that barrier. Extend the earnout perhaps, spread that over a 2-year period instead of a 1-year period to see if that smooths out the bump in the road, so to speak. So there is a number of ways that we can deal with that. So all the risk isn't with you, you're spreading that risk, sharing that with the seller. So they're effectively putting the money where their mouths are in that regard, especially if they're talking about having a really good pipeline going forward into the future. Dropping profitability, again, if it turns out that that's happening, don't see it as a negative automatically. Think of different ways that perhaps you can negotiate a deal if that were to be the case. I mean, it could be a good business, but again, due to some unfortunate issue that can be quite quickly and easily resolved, there may be a blip. So look at maybe perhaps again the earnout to see if you could share that risk until they're back on track, until the profitability starts to rise up again. And find a contingent liability as well. A lot of companies have a lot of cash in. A lot of sellers want to leave or exit, should we say, to get their cash out. Some sellers have got maybe £1 million in cash that they want to get advantage of take advantage, I should say, of the entrepreneur's relief, which could be another motivating factor for them to sell their business. And finally, the COVID-19 effect is something else to think about. Extend the earnout and change the year end. Some people do that. So rather than it looking like a bad financial year, I think you're allowed for a year or 2 years. You obviously want to get the right advice from your accountant on doing so before doing it, but you might want to extend that financial year in order to make sure that smooths out that perhaps blip in the road, should we say. Okay, moving on to the share purchase agreement failures. So the negotiations don't stop at the heads of term stage. Once we enter into a share purchase agreement, this is why having a good lawyer is very, very important. That does continue. I would say stay away from these copy and paste type agreements. A lot of buyers don't necessarily have great, shall we say, expectations of lawyers sometimes, and they think that it's going to cost them a lot of money throughout the process, and they can do it themselves at half of the price or a fraction of the price. That can sometimes be a costly mistake to make. So you really do want to use a good M&A lawyer and be presented by somebody that's been through these, obviously purchase situations before. And every deal is different. Every share purchase agreement is personalized for that deal. It's got specific warranties and indemnities in it. The de minimis needs to be negotiated, and there's a lot more detail that needs to go in over and above the nuances of the deal and the deal structure themselves, earn-out protections. I can't stress how important that is as well, making sure that they're negotiated properly so it's a fair agreement all round, and you're not caught out as well as a buyer. So, agreements out of context, be reasonable and review agreements. Make sure that the documents are fit for purpose. Understand your lawyer and control the process. Don't let them just run away with it. Sometimes these deals can take a lot longer than they ought to because you're taking your eye off the ball. You should be just on it as much as you are with the negotiations. And always understand what's going on in these documents. Make sure you've got a lawyer that explains that, and we'll help you very much at this phase. Part of what we do at Chelsea Corporate is ensure that the advisors are doing the right things at the right times, and obviously the deal stays on track and on course to complete as and when it should, and meets all the time scales along the way. Accept that there are risks involved, but obviously be aware of what's coming, and make sure that you're understanding every aspect of those agreements. So finally, the fifth thing I want to talk about is contacting a seller's customers and vendors without permission. This is a real no-no. There are some overzealous buyers out there. They think they're exciting. The business is absolutely great, but there's a lot of people that can be a little bit paranoid, perhaps, or maybe cautious is a better word to use. So what do they go and do? They make it their own business to go ahead and contact the clients without the seller's consent. And what can happen is, of course, that can just ruin the deal, kill the deal straight away. I've seen it happen before. And of course, don't forget, you're going to be under confidentiality in the NDA. Also, the heads of terms has a separate confidentiality clause in it, and these are all legally binding. So refrain from making contact until the appropriate time, of course. And if you've got that good relationship with the seller that you're building up over time, they'll want to help you. It's in their best interest to make sure that you are happy with the transaction, you're happy with the deal, and we're covering all bases here. So they will work with you. Don't feel that you've got to work against one another. The best deals that happen are always the ones where it's joined up and both seller and buyer are all on the same page. Customers are the most important relationship for the seller and the buyer. That's absolutely true. But wait until the deal's done, and then I'm sure you'll see that the seller will be willing to go on a few key customer meetings with you to make sure that handover and that transition is done accordingly.